We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 111a. On the previous Amud, the Brisa said that if somebody has a middleman hire workers for him, so then there is no violation of Baal Tolin, of delaying the wages, delaying the payment. And the reason is because when it comes to the person who's actually the employer, he's not the one that went out and hired. Vizel Fishain Pulaso Etzlo, and the middleman, they're not really working for him. And as Rashi says, Vizel Fishain Pulaso Ola Velo Karina Be Pulaso Itcha. You can't call it, you can't refer to it by the words in the pasuk, and so therefore there is no Baal Tolin in this case. And the Gemara clarifies, hey Chidami, what exactly is the case? If the middleman said that the wages are my responsibility, meaning the middleman is taking responsibility to pay those wages, so then Scharu Olavu, so then he takes the responsibility, and then really he is the one hiring, there should be Baal Tolin. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Hasocher Sapo Elasos Bishalo, if somebody hires a worker to work in his own property, Vehereu Bishal Chavero, but then instead he shows the worker the property of his friend, and he has the worker do work in his friend's property, no sin lo schar mishulam, he has to pay the full wages. V'chozer v'notel mi balabayis mashehen also, but then he is able to take from the balabayis whatever benefit he gave to the balabayis with this work. But you see that really this employee is this individual, it's considered to be this individual's employee. And so the Gemara says, lo no tzrich, it's necessary, da'amar l'hu secharchem al balabayis. The case is where the middleman says the wages are the responsibility of the balabayis, so in this situation there is no Baal Tolin, neither for the middleman nor for the balabayis. And the Gemara continues, Yehuda bar Meremar Amar le Leshame, Yehuda bar Meremar would tell his attendant, Zil Agar Lipolim, go and hire for me workers, ve'emalu, and say to them, Scharchem al balabayis, that the wages are the responsibility of the balabayis, and that way again there is no Baal Tolin. Similarly, Meremar and Marzutra Agri Lahadadi, Meremar and Marzutra, they would hire for one another also to avoid Baal Tolin. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna says, Hani Shukoi de Surah, if you have the worker, the Balabatim rather of Surah, Lo Avri Mishum Baal Tolin, so they are not going to transgress Baal Tolin, because Meida Yodi Dal Yom de Shuka Smichi, because it's known, everyone is relying on the market day, the day of the market, in order to get paid, and therefore there is no Baal Tolin, Avol Mishum Baal Tesha Avadai over, but there is an idea of delaying the payment, meaning to say if you delay it beyond that Yom de Shuka, then it is going to be problematic. Rashi says, the idea again is, he tells the attendant to hire the workers, that way there is no transgression of Baal Tolin. And similarly, Agriya Hadadi, Meremar, and Marzutra would hire for one another, and when one would need workers, the other one would make the stipulation with the workers, and he would say to them that your wages are the responsibility of the balabayis. And then the Gemara said, Hani Shukoi de Surah, Balabatim shall Surah, the Balabatim in Surah, Shein Magian Lemos ad Yom Hashuk. The point is they don't get money until the day of the market, Lo Avri al Schar Polin, so they don't violate the wages, withholding the wages of the workers, because Meida Yodi Dal Yom de Shuka Samchi, everybody knows that they're relying on that day of the market, Lahagia Lemos, because that's when they're going to get money. Hilka Chafilu Islay Mos Gabe, therefore even if he has money, Lo Avri, there's no transgression, that is the understanding all along when he is hiring them. Once you don't violate it the first morning, it really is only a violation the first morning, so you're not going to violate it any longer. However, there is a violation of Baal Tesha, of delaying the wages, if you're going to delay it beyond the day of the market. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Socher shows, if somebody is hired by the hour, Gova kol halaylo v'chol hayom, then he collects all night and all day. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Socher shows the yom. Let's say a person is hired for a few hours of the day, Gova kol hayom, so then he collects his wages the entire day. Socher shows the laila, if he's hired for a few hours of the night, Gova kol halayla, so then he collects his wages the entire night. Ushmuel Amar, but Shmuel says, Socher shows the yom, Gova kol hayom. If he's hired for a few hours of the day, he collects all day. However, V'socher shows the laila, if he's hired for a few hours of the night, Gova kol halayla v'chol hayom, so then he collects the entire night and the entire day. And the Gemara says, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Socher shows Gova kol halayla v'chol hayom. It says if he's hired for a few hours, he collects the entire night and the day. That seems to be like Shmuel. And so the Gemara says to Yufta de Rav, is that a refutation of Rav? And the Gemara says, Amar lach Rav, Rav will say to you, Litzdad and Katani, the way to understand the Mishnah is to understand it to its sides, meaning to say as follows, Socher shows the Yom, Gova kol hayom. What the Mishnah is saying is, if he's hired for a few hours in the day, he collects all day. And Socher shows the Laila, gova kol halayla. If he's hired for a few hours of the night, he then collects all night. Meaning to say, even though the Mishnah sounds like it's talking about one case, you're supposed to split up the Mishnah, and it means to say sachar shows gova kol halayla v'chol hayom, two separate cases. It depends on the situation. If it shows the yom, it's gova kol hayom. If it shows the laila, it's gova kol halayla. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Haya Sachar Shabbos, Sachar Chodesh, Sachar Shana, Sachar Shavua. Let's say the person is hired for a week or a month or a year, a Shemitah cycle. Yotze Bayom Gova Kol Hayom. If he leaves his work during the day, he collects all day. Yotze Balayla. If he leaves his work at night, so Gova Kol Halayla V'Chol Hayom, he collects the entire night and the day. Again, it seems to be like Shmuel. And the Gemara says, Amar Lach Rav, Rav will say to you, Tanoi, it's actually a Machlokas Tanoim. There's a Machlokas Tanoim about this issue. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Sachar shows the Yom, if he's hired to a few hours of the day, Gova Kol Hayom, he collects the entire day. Sachar shows the Laila, if he's hired for some hours of the night, Gova Kol Halayla, he collects the entire night. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and that is consistent with what Rav said. Rabbi Shimon says, Sachar shows the Yom, Gova Kol Hayom. If he's hired for a few hours of the day, he collects all day. Sachar shows the Laila. If he is hired for some hours of the night, Gova Kol Halayla, V'chol Hayom, then he collects the entire night and the day. And the Brisa continues, Mikan Amru, from here they say, Kol HaKovesh Sechar Socher, anybody who withholds wages from a worker over Behei Shemos is going to violate, Hei Shemos Halalu is going to violate the following 5 Viaseh, meaning to say the following 5 negative commandments, and also will violate a positive commandment, Mishum Bal Tashok Esrayecha, first he's going to violate oppressing your friend, and Mishum Bal Tigzol, you can't steal, and Mishum Bal Tashok Socher Ani, and also you can't oppress somebody who's a poor worker, and Mishum Bal Tolin, you can't hold the wages, umishum biyomo titein sechar. This is the positive commandment. You have to pay that day. Umishum lo savo olav hashemesh, and also the pasuk of the sun can't set, and you have not paid him. And the Gemara then asks, Hani dika biyamav aleka belelia. What do you mean to say that there are 5 plus the aseh, but some of them apply at night and they don't? Some of them apply at the day and they don't apply at night. And the ika belelia leka biyamama, some apply at night and they don't apply during the day. And the Gemara answers to that. Amar Rav Chisda says, Shem schiros bi'alma. We just mean in general, when it comes to withholding wages, there are these violations that are associated with that. And Rashi explains, Socher shows the Yom, if he's hired during the day, Sheniskar lo min habokar chatzos, meaning a few hours of the day, let's say until chatzos, until midday. So Gova Kol Hayom, then he'll be able to collect the entire day. Da kolsa schirusa mechatzos, v'ika below savo. Now his hiring ended at chatzos, and therefore you have this idea that the sun cannot set before he's paid. But Sachar shows Delilah, let's say he's hired at night, so Gova Kol Halayla, so then he's going to collect the entire night, that's according to Rav, over Mishum Bal Tolin, once dawn comes, so then there's a violation of Bal Tolin, because again, the obligation set in earlier. Now Shmuel says there's a difference between day and night. Shmuel says, Sachar shows the Yom who Gova Kol Hayom, if he is hired for a few hours of the day, so yes, he collects the whole day, like we said, the night doesn't then follow the day, the deadline is at the end of the day. Aval Sachar shows the Laila, but let's say he's hired for a few hours of the night, according to Shmuel. Gova Kol Halayla V'chol Hayom, he collects the night and the day. Shahayom Holech Achar Halayla, because in general the day follows the night. Meaning to say, we have the day starts at the beginning of the night, that's the beginning of your 24 hours, and then it goes through the whole day. The day naturally follows the night. Ho'alu Schiraso Belel Yom Zeh, since he was hired on the night of this particular day. V'lodami l'schir Yom de Esmol Sheino Gova Kol Halayla. It's not similar to a situation where a person is hired during the day, so then we say you don't get to collect the entire next night, because that next night already is like the start of a new day. The Gemara then tried to bring a proof from the Mishnah. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Sachar shows Gova Kol Halayla V'chol Hayom. It says that if he's hired for some hours, he collects the whole night and the whole day. So Bishlama Shmuel, we understand Shmuel, Mukila B'schira shows the Laila. You can simply say the Mishnah is talking about where he's hired for a few hours of the night, and that's why you can say he collects the whole night and the next day. Ela Rabba my Mukila, but according to Rav, you can't make the Mishnah make any sense, because according to Rav, you're always just going to collect either the day or the night. And the Gemara says, let's start, and you'll have to say, according to Rav, that it's essentially to its sides, meaning to say it's two cases. V'achid kamar means to say as follows. Sachar shows yesh shagova kol halayla, v'yesh shagova kol hayom cheda'amri ano. When it comes to being hired for some hours, sometimes you collect all night, sometimes you collect all day. Again, just like Rav said, yotza b'layla. So then we brought another proof in the Mishnah. It says that let's say he's hired for a longer term and he leaves in the middle of the night. And so what do we see from that line in the Mishnah? Alma ho'elu mashcha pulosa b'layla. It seems to say in the Mishnah that since since his work went into the night, Havle Sacher shows Delilah, he's considered to be somebody hired for a few hours at night. V'katani, and again, what does it say in the Mishnah? Gova kol halayla v'chol hayom. It says he collects all night and the following day. So that also seemed to be a question on Rav, and Rav then said it was actually a machlokas tanoim. And then the Braisa said that mishum lo sigzol, the Braisa said that you violate 5 lavin and 1 aseh when it comes to withholding wages. One of those was not to steal. Because earlier in Paragezo Neshech we say that lo sigzol is actually referring to withholding wages. Di gezel mamish, because if it really meant stealing, milav de ribis v'ona nafka, you could actually learn that out from a combination of ribis and ona. That's a combination of interest, and ona refers to overcharging. Hey shemos, again chamish lav, and there are 5 lav, and the 5 lav are lo sashok esreyacha, velo sigzol, velo solin, velo sashok sachir ani ve'evyon, biyomo titein sacharo is the positive, velo savo olav hashemesh, va'aseh biyomo titein, velo savo hashemesh is again, that's the 5th negative, so you have 5 negative commandments and 1 positive commandment. Shem schiris, and then the Gemara said, well, some of them apply days, some at night, so you don't really have 5 and 1. So we said, we mean to say, in general, when it comes to wages, there are 5 and 1. Kulu bechad vade lo mashkachas. So you're not going to have in one situation all of those. Elohachi kamar just means averos kol hashemos halolu b'shem schiris, and all of these are relevant to withholding wages. Yesh mehen b'schiris laila, v'yesh mehen b'schiris yom. Some apply by someone hired at night, and some apply during the day. And the Gemara continues, Ezehu oshek ve'ezo gezel, what's considered oppression and what's considered stealing? Amar of Chisda says, Leich v'shov, if the person says, go, come back, go and come back, meaning, come back later and I'll pay you, Zehu oshek, that's considered oppression. Yeshlach b'yadi ve'ni nosen lach, if he says, I owe you the money but I'm not giving it to you, Zehu gezel, that's considered stealing. The Gemara continues, Maskif lo Rav Sheshas asks, the Brisa says, Ezehu oshek shechayva olav Torah carbon, what is considered oshek, which the Torah says you have to bring a carbon for? It has to be dumya de pikadon. It has to be similar to a deposit, to kakafar leimamona, meaning that he's denying actual money. Meaning it sounds like by oshek there has to be a denial of the obligation, and that's not where Rav Chisda said. Rav Chisda said it's when the person says, come back later, I'll pay you later. So it seems like the definition that Rav Chisda provided of oshek is not accurate. Elamar Rav Sheshas, rather Rav Sheshas says, nisativ loch zehu oshek. If he says that I already paid it to you, I gave it to you, I don't owe you, that's oppression. Yeshlach biyadi ve'eni nosen lach. But if he says I have what's yours, but I'm not giving it to you again, like before, zehu gezel, that's considered gezel. But the Gemara continues, Maskif lo Abaya. Abaya asks on Rav Sheshas, it says in the Braisa, Ezehu gezel, shechayva olav Torah carbon. What's considered the gezel, where you have to bring a carbon according to the Torah? Domya de pikadon, again, it has to be similar to a deposit. But inon de kakafar leimamona, there needs to be a denial of the money, and here again, there's no denial of the money. What Rav Sheshas is essentially saying is, I owe you money, but I'm not going to give it to you. So again, that doesn't seem to be the proper definition of gezel. So Elamar Abaya, rather Abaya says both have to involve denial. Lo sechartich me'olam zeu oshik. If the person says it never happened, I never hired you, that's considered oppression. Nasativ lach, if the person said I already paid you, zeu gezel, that's considered stealing. Both of those, the person is denying the obligation. But the Gemara continues, Rav Sheshas. Now, according to Rav Sheshas, Maishna Oshek de Kashale. When it came to oppression, Rav Sheshas had this question that Oshek has to involve denial. Maishna Gezel de lo Kashale. But when it came to Gezel, he didn't have that. He wasn't bothered by that. He didn't say that Gezel had to involve denial. And the Gemara says, Amar Lach, no, he'll say to you, Gezel de Gazle v'hadr kafre. In the case of Gezel, the case is initially he steals from him and then later he denies it. Yes, it is true that it involves denial, but that can come later. But the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, afilu oshek nami. You could say the same thing by the case of oppression. The hadr kafre, maybe later he'll deny it. Why are we applying that only by Gezel? The Gemara says, no, hachi hashti, you can't compare the two. B'shlam mahasam, it makes sense over there. Ksiv o begezel, it says or begezel. Mechlal de odile meikar. That sounds like he's admitting from the outset. Aval gabe oshek, but when it comes to oshek, miksiv o beoshek. It doesn't say o beoshek. O Ashak Ksiv. It says O Ashak Shashako Kvar. That means that he already oppressed him. Meaning to say, Rav Sheshas does make that distinction, and Rav Sheshas says that when it comes to Oshek, so there has to be a denial immediately. That means Ashako Kvar, there was immediately that he oppressed him. But when it comes to Gezel, you could be talking about a situation where originally he admitted that he owed it. That's O Begezel Mechlal de Odile Meikara, and there was only a later denial. Rava Amar Rava says Zehu Oshek Zehu Gezel. Really, they're identical. Oshek and Gezel are the same. Why does the pasuk divide it into two terms? Lav or Allah b'shnei lavin, just so that the person transgresses two negative commandments. And Rashi explains gezel, the term gezel, mashmasha naso biyodo miyodo mamish. That sounds like he's forcing to take it from his hand. It's more direct, tfei meoshek, more than oppression. Tichsiv, like it's written in the pasuk, vayigzol es hachanis miyad hamitzri. It says he stole it from the Egyptian. V'chein b'ba'al echem vayigzolu es kol asher yavor aleim b'derech. So it sounds like a more direct kind of stealing than when it comes to oshek. That's just the general distinction. But then maskiv lo Rav Sheshes, then Rav Sheshes asked, al karchach oshek, when we use the word oshek, it has to be the kakafar le, that there's a denial here. It can't just be that he's saying, come back later and I'll pay you. The reason we know that is because in Torah Kohanim, meaning in Sefer Vayikra, there is such a thing as korban shvu over there. That involves a case where there's a false oath and you have to bring a korban. As it's written, it talks about denying pikadon. And again, we say that's by oshek as well. Elamar Rav Sheshes, rather Rav Sheshes says, and again Rav Sheshes said by oshek, yes, there's a denial, but by gezela he didn't say that. And that's why L'kamon Parach, later on, the Gemara will ask, Rav Sheshes Maishna Oshek the Kashale, why is he bothered by Oshek that there has to be a denial? Maishna Gezel the Lo Kashale, he wasn't bothered by Gezel. And then the Gemara said, Lo Sechartech Me'olam, if he says that I never hired you, Lo Dami LeGezel, that's already not like Gezel, that's in the category of Oshek. Ki Nesativ Loch, because over there he's saying, I gave it to you already. To Hamodi Le David Bahadeva Kagazale, because Gezela means he's admitting, I admit that you worked for me, that I owe you, but Gazale, I'm saying I already paid you, I don't need to pay you any money. But then the Gemara asked, as we said, Maishna Gezel de lo Kashale, why wasn't Rav Sheshes bothered by Gezel? Ha'iyunami gabe korban shvua. If you have korban shvua by Gezel also, v'lo kafar shvua heichen. If there's no denial, why is there a shvua? And Rashi continues. Then the Gemara answered on behalf of Rav Sheshes, the gazle v'hadar kafre. First he steals, but then there is a denial. Meaning kolzman shalotavu bebezin ela beino levein atzmo haya gozlo. Meaning before they got to court, it was just between the two parties. That's when he was quote unquote stealing. V'yomer eini nosin lach. He just said, I'm not going to give it to you. He didn't deny it, but he said, I'm not going to give it to you. But then when the claim was made in court, kafar v'nishba, that's when he did a denial and he took an oath. But it's really not called gezel unless he says eini nosin lach. He admits it, but he says, I'm not going to give it to you. That's what is called gezel. But the Gemara says, if you can give that answer by gezel, just give the exact same answer by oppression. To say that what is oshek, say it's like Rav Chisda, b'leich v'shov, that go, come back later and I'll give it to you. And your whole question is, how come there's an oath? Could go into Hadar Kafre, just say there's a later denial, simple answer. And the Gemara says, I understand you can say that by Gezela, because it says O begezel, meaning v'kichesh hashta, meaning there's a denial now, even though it wasn't earlier. It sounds like he admitted originally and then denied. What he was doing as Gezela until now, now there's a denial. The kafar mikodem kichesh kari gezel. Before the denial, it was called gezel. Avalacha miksiv o ba'oshek. Here it doesn't say o ba'oshek, the name of a kichesh ba'oshek to meikara, that he's denying the earlier oshek. You can't read it that way. O ashak ksiv. It says o ashak al yidei hachosha ashako, means through the denial is oshek. Sha'ashako kvar means already was oshek before. Misha she'ischil atovo oshko. Even from the beginning of the claim, he was already oppressing him at bekachisha by denying it. V'lo nikra eshek al yidei davar acher kodem kachisha. It's not that it was called eshek earlier through something else. Rather, again, it's the denial that creates the oppression. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Echad Sachar Adam v'Echad Sachar Behema v'Echad Sachar Kalim, whether a person hired a person, or a person hired an animal, or a person rented out some kind of a vessel. Yesh bo mishum biyomo titin suchar. There's a halacha biyomo titin sucharo that you have to pay him his wages on that day. V'yesh bo mishum lo solin pula sachir et chad boker, and also the negative prohibition that you can't withhold the wages until the morning. Eimasai, when is this all true? Bisman shatavo. That's if the worker claims his money, he asks for his money. But lo tavo, but if no claim is made, eino over all of, then there's no transgression. Let's say he has him go to a storekeeper or to a money changer. Essentially, he says to the storekeeper, you give him some payros as his wages and I'll pay you for that. Or he tells the money changer to give him money and he'll give money to the money changer. So at that point, he's put the obligation, he's taken care of the obligation rather through the chenvani or the shulchani. So eino over all of, at that point in time, he's not going to transgress these violations. Sachar However, when it comes to a hired worker, bismano, if it is the proper time when he's supposed to get paid, nishba v'notel, he can take an oath and collect his payment. Meaning to say, let's say he has to prove, the person says, I already paid you, and he says, you didn't pay me, he can take an oath to collect. Avar zmano, but once the time already passed, eino nishba v'notel, he can't take an oath in order to collect. Im yesh edim shetavo bismano, if there are edim that he didn't make the claim from him in the proper time, so then hareza nishba v'notel, so then he's allowed to take the oath and collect, even if it's no longer the proper time, because he has witnesses that he did make the claim in the proper time. Ger Toshav, when it comes to a Ger Toshav is somebody who accepts upon himself not to worship Avodah Zarah. He resides in Eretz Yisrael, but he doesn't keep all of the mitzvahs. So Yeshbo Mishum B'yom Otiten Secharo. There is a halacha B'yom Otiten Secharo. You have to pay him his wages on that day. However, Ve'einbo Mishum Lo Solin Pula Sachir Itchad Boker. The pasuk of Lo Solin does not apply to a Ger Toshav. And the Gemara says, Moni Masnisen, who is the author of Mishnah? Lo Tanakama de Meachicha, it's not the Tanakama of Meachicha. V'lo Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, it's also not Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says, Mahi, what are we referring to here when we talk about the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? The Tanya, as we learned in a Bryce, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis.